All right, everyone. Thanks so much. We've got our next presenter up. We've got Bob Long here to talk about quail, turkey, and fire. And I'm going to let him take it away. All right, thank you.
All right, great to see so many folks here today. I'm Bob Long with the Wildlife and Heritage Service. What do you say, Chris? You're not a fire ecologist, you're just a plant geek? I guess I'm the quail and turkey geek for the department. I'm not a fire ecologist either. But some great stuff already presented. I thought it was interesting. It just kind of came to me when Chris was presenting his. For those of you that are really interested in like game species and you're kind of thinking, oh, rare plants, whatever. The first two sites that Chris talked about there, the first site, we did that project specifically for quail on the WMA. Okay, so we thinned and we started to burn. Quail did not come back. They didn't respond, but all the rare plants did. And they just, so he was super excited. They did another project that he talked about at Furnacetown specifically for rare plants, and quail showed up on it. And we had no idea they would do that. So there's a lot of overlap here. So it's really good stuff. And this is like 4 presentations rolled into one, and gonna try to get through it in 20 minutes. So I'm gonna have to blow through a lot of stuff. Hopefully not like Deborah did, where we just have to skip complete slides, but let's get rolling. It's not working for me either. I am. I can just do this.
Not using a tablet. Try that.
There we go. All right, northern bobwhite, also known as quail. It's our only quail species in the east and in Maryland. It's a small resident gallinaceous bird, so chicken-like bird. And I specifically struck through prefers grassland, shrubland habitats because it's really not optional for quail. It's not just that they like to be in grassland and shrubland or early successional habitats. They need it. Like they just cannot survive anywhere else. Very relevant to this talk, a real prominent researcher, Herbert Stoddard, many years ago, termed quail the firebird because they were so commonly associated with burned landscapes. So they really do well in areas that have a frequent fire. Their population has declined significantly. Kind of leave it at that. I usually put up a slide showing the decline, but kind of makes me cry, so I'm gonna avoid that. But they're the most declining bird species in Maryland. The good news is that they still exist, and in certain places where we have good habitat, I would say they're thriving even, at least relative to other places. Maybe not compared to 50 years ago, but they're doing quite well where we have habitat. Okay, so on the subject of habitat, I won't go through all the details of this. This was for another talk, but you won't find a quail biologist in the country that doesn't say that habitat is the #1 issue facing quail. So that's what it's all about. Yes, we do have increased predator populations, which has exacerbated things, but when you have good habitat, even in the absence of trapping, you can still have good quail populations. So what is quail habitat? This is a diagram that you've probably seen before showing the process of succession. It's really important with quail, and as we get into turkey, you'll see that we understand what succession is, and because habitat management for quail is all about managing succession. So if you have some sort of natural disturbance or man-made disturbance, wildfire, a prescribed fire, this could be an agricultural field that's just been farmed for years, but you let it alone, don't do anything, you will have a progression of what we call seral stages that vegetation will move through. You're going to start out with grasses and herbaceous vegetation, your broadleaf plants, forbs. It's going to move more into woody vegetation as the years go on. When that canopy closes and you start to get trees where there's no sunlight on the ground, that's kind of where the benefits to quail are just completely gone. And a lot of these other species that depend on that kind of habitat. So it depends where you're at, but generally you're talking, 6 to 10 year window of benefits. And then, if you've got trees invading in that site, you'll lose the benefits after that. I don't think we have anybody talking about non-game wildlife species, so I just wanted to make a plug for that there's a whole host of other birds that are in steep declines, maybe not as severe as quail, but they also depend on early successional habitats. So it's really important stuff. Very high level view of quail habitat. We can't get into the weeds too much, so to speak, but this is kind of the essential components that you need in quail habitat in these approximate percentages. You've got maybe 40% grasses, 40% forbs, 20% shrubs. And that can change, of course, depending on the site and what's around it. You'll notice no trees in that pie chart. Okay, so quail are ground dwelling species. They nest on the ground. They don't roost in trees. They spend all their time on the ground. So trees really aren't an important part of their habitat. They can persist in places with trees if the understory provides the proper habitat, but the trees aren't really vitally important to quail. So grasses are used for year-round cover, but they are preferred for nesting. You can see a quail nest here tucked into the base of a native grass. It's really important that we have native grasses out there instead of introduced grasses. So things like fescue, orchard grass forms a mat and is not conducive to quail habitat, but your native grasses, broom sedge, little blue stem, switchgrass, things like that is what quail really need. The forb component is really important. This is where a lot of the seed and insects and vegetation that they eat comes from. So it's a really important component. A solid monotypic grass stand is not good quail habitat. You have to have a good portion of that in forb, so herbaceous plants. It's really important for brood habitat. Oh, it was the pollen talk was really interesting. All the ragweed that was here, like that was so cool. All this ragweed was here prior to settlement. Ragweed is one of the best quail plants. Okay, that has a great structure, good seed source, and to think about just seeds of ragweed, like must have been quail and turkey poults running everywhere. I mean, pretty neat. So I'd never seen that before. Luke, this is saying the battery's running low. Is that? Am I out of time already? I just closed it. Okay. But I didn't know if something needed to be plugged in. And we'll keep rolling. So the shrub component, very important in northern latitudes. We're kind of on the northern fringe of the quail range. And they need this for a couple reasons. They need to, during inclement weather, so if you get a bad winter, get a few feet of snow, they need a place that they can, where there's vegetation that they can hide under. But more importantly, year round, they need a place to escape predators. I mean, everything likes to eat a quail. I mean, you've got these little tiny birds. You've got avian predators and mammalian predators that are constantly pursuing them, and they need a shrubby thicket, hedgerow type of situation. Blackberries, sumac thickets, cedar thickets, things like that are super important, and you want these interspersed throughout the area. Okay, so switching gears to eastern wild turkey, another large chicken-like bird, eats a lot of the same stuff, but they do tend to favor larger seeds like mast, oak mast and hickories, things like that. Their population has actually increased significantly following our restoration efforts to move turkeys into unoccupied habitat over like the last 50 years. But we are noticing some kind of concerning declines in certain regions and in other states. So really nationwide, we're seeing some declines in these previously high turkey populations. So we're trying to get a handle on that. We started a turkey research project last year. We're in year 2 of that, where we're trying to understand, what is impacting that population and why they're declining. So I'm going to share a little bit of that data here just to kind of get a few points across. kind of hot off the presses stuff here in a few slides. General turkey habitat, they are found in or near forest. They need trees to roost in. So they're a little different than quail in that they roost in trees. But they really don't need vast expanses of unbroken forest. They do better in a mosaic of open land and forest. Going to really focus on nesting and brood rearing habitat because that seems to be the most limiting factor when it comes to turkeys. So there's a ton of research that has taken place and is currently going on with turkeys, and that's usually what we come back to, is that there's problems with producing young to replace the adults that are lost. So nesting habitat for turkeys is typically thick vegetation. You know, here's a example of a turkey nest, and it's basically early successional habitat. So it's quail habitat is where turkeys like to nest and where they are most successful nesting. They will nest in other places just in the middle of the forest next to a tree, but they're usually not successful in places like that. So here's some of that data that I've mentioned to show you how important this nesting and brood rearing period is. We were kind of shocked. We had almost half of the hens were killed while nesting or raising young. They're spending time on the ground in this type of habitat that is what we feel is limited on the landscape, and they're getting hit by predators, you know. So yeah, foxes, raccoons in this region, and other regions it was other suites of predators. Of the ones that did survive nesting and actually didn't get killed while they were sitting on the nest, those nests were not very successful. So only about 1 out of 4 nests successfully hatched statewide. It was even worse in the eastern region where we're seeing these declines. We only have about 1 out of 5 nests successfully hatch. So habitat's super important. They have to be protected from predators. And this is an important concept, I think, is that the amount of nesting habitat that is available is important. And we'll be doing a lot of data analysis to try to get, you know, some real quantitative figures on this. But, you know, this is sort of just an anecdotal. Like I said, we just have 1 year of data, just like an example to point something out here. So this was a successful nest right here in the middle of this large fallow field. This was like knee-high blackberry and grasses and some little sweet gum seedlings. We went in, I think Evan helped find this nest, and we spent like 20 minutes, but we had the GPS point for this nest. She hatched, the poults left. We went in to try to find it. We couldn't find it. It was really dense vegetation. Excellent nesting habitat, and it was a lot of it. It was this large area. So that's just kind of like approximately how much of this kind of stuff was out there. Very difficult for a predator to hunt that all efficiently. Okay, we can compare that to an unsuccessful nest. This bird was nesting on the edge of a field here, actually close to one of the TNC properties. Probably should have went over there because there was better habitat, but it was really well concealed. She was like buried back in the middle of this greenbrier patch. You would think that it was a very safe spot, but when you really think about it, this was all closed canopy forest all around here, okay, with a very open understory, which is little strip of thick vegetation. So a predator can hunt that really efficiently. First night she was sitting on that nest, a fox came in, killed her, and took the eggs. So just kind of shows you that you want this type of habitat, but not just little patches of it. You want some large patches, and they'll be more successful. Okay, once those nests hatch, the poults need insects and they need protection from predators. They're basically quail sized and everything wants to eat them. So they're going to go to forb-dominated early successional habitats where there's protection, overhead protection, and there's a lot of insects. So again, early successional habitats like you see down there on the left. Some of our data shows that our poults aren't surviving well. Only about half of those broods survived to 4 weeks old, and the average number of poults was somewhat low. So again, we're not producing enough young. Nesting success is low. Brood survival is low, and it's likely can be linked back to habitat. To kind of wrap, I was thinking about how to kind of wrap quail and turkey up together, because I had never done a talk where I kind of talked about both of them. It way oversimplified, but if we can kind of think of Maryland like this, you've got a lot of the state that's closed canopy forest, whether it's hardwood or pine, very little understory, just not good nesting or brood rearing cover or quail habitat. You've got a lot of open land, ag fields, pasture land, whatever. And you've got a very small percentage of the landscape. This is probably generous. It's probably more like less than 10% is in really good habitat. And yeah, you've got turkeys that will use these open. We know they're fairly adaptable species. They will, use these regularly. But the really important stuff is taking place up here in this little slice of the landscape. You've got turkeys nesting there, trying to raise young there. And it's the only place quail can survive. And they're all jammed into these smaller and smaller patches that are more isolated all the time. So a very important type of habitat that we need to keep on the landscape. So where does fire come in? Well, you have to do something to set succession back. It will continue to want to progress towards that closed canopy forest. So the Aldo Leopold, father of wildlife management, 90 years ago now, he very forward thinking. We can restore these species with the same tools that we've used to destroy it: axe, cow, plow, and fire. Okay, so these are all things that we can use to manipulate habitat, manage habitat, and we could have a whole talk about any of them, but we'll spend the next 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes focusing on fire. So what does fire do to wildlife habitat, and specifically quail and turkeys? Well, we increase plant diversity, and we heard from speakers that kind of already drove that point home, so I won't spend too much time on it. Basically, you're just going to have more seed production, more food for these animals. I think Chris documented 18 species of native legumes in that Idlewild thinning and burning. Okay, that's all stuff that quail will use, and is really preferred plants that quail love. So fire also will set back succession. This is a big one. We're constantly battling succession, where it wants, your trees, your gums will come in, it wants to go to a forest, and you can help control, I'm not going to say eliminate, but help control succession that way. Going to remove leaf litter and grass thatch that will really keep these birds from being able to use the stands. It might look good from a distance. You might have grasses and forbs, and it's like, yeah, that looks pretty quaily. But if you get down underneath there, if it's all choked in with a lot of thatch and previous year's vegetation, they can't navigate through it. I mean, these birds are only that big. They just can't do it. They can't find seeds. They can't hunt insects effectively. So you want to remove that dead thatch so that you expose bare soil, and they can use these stands. New growth after fire tends to be more nutritious. So that if there's any big deer people, maybe not, but it's in the deer world, they're doing a lot of research where they're looking at the palatability of vegetation after different treatments, and they're finding that in these burned areas, you get a lot higher value from that browse. And anybody that's done a burn and then went back there, after everything starts greening up, I mean, it is just mowed down by deer. We probably have too many deer, but it's also very nutritious stuff. It's like a natural food plot where everything wants to go to it. So some considerations when you're thinking about doing a burn with wildlife in mind, kind of just still keeping in that context of wildlife. Location, timing, frequency, scale, and intensity are all things that we can change that can either help or hurt these wildlife species. You can really burn anywhere that can, I mean, just if it can burn, burn it is kind of the bottom line. I do want to mention though that sunlight on the ground is key. So you can do these understory burns where there's still it's shaded, it's closed canopy, and you're burning off the leaf litter, and that's fine, but you probably won't get long-term benefits from that where you have a lot of good species that are really beneficial coming in. And of course, native grass fields, and don't overlook just like any of these other little odd areas that you just kind of burn. It rejuvenates the site and does, even if it's just, a little half an acre, it can really be helpful. Timing of burns, you've really got sort of two categories: dormant season burns, which are kind of our traditional period burning window where you do it in late winter, early spring. The cover grows back very quickly. Few negative effects such as nest disruption. So there's not a lot of animals using these at that point. The real limitation there is you have limited control of your, they're dormant. So you may top kill them, but you're not going to control them very effectively. If you talk about growing season burns, when things are actively growing, typically like late summer, early fall period, you get a much better control of your hardwoods with those types of burns. But you do have a little bit more risk to nesting and brooding from these ground nesting birds. And your cover's a little more limited. So you would want to consider what's around it, what's adjacent to it, and make sure that you're not eliminating everything at once. So on that subject, kind of a hot topic among turkey enthusiasts and turkey hunters specifically, there's a lot of thoughts that burns are really, a negative for, oh, 1 minute. Okay, I'll blow through it. He told me I could go as long as I wanted. So peak turkey nesting season, April 15th through July. Most of the research, though, suggests that populations can withstand some of this. Really, the benefits outweigh the negatives, okay? So you're going to improve that habitat for a longer period of time. Just consider what's around it again. All right, frequency, very site dependent. Maybe 1 to 2 years for bobwhite, but longer if you're really interested in turkey nesting. Very site dependent. Oh, wow, I forgot I had all this in here. Turkeys are going to avoid the center of burned areas. So they really they select for the burned areas. They love them, but they're typically only going to use the edge. So think about your configuration. This whole thing is usable by turkeys. It's only the perimeter. So smaller, more linear blocks. I know it's more difficult to burn, but if you're concerned about turkeys, you would arrange things to do that. Varying intensities can be good. You can provide some diversity in that stand. Your fire lines can double as brood habitat. See the quail standing there in that nice ragweed strip. And Nanticoke Wildlife Management Area, if you ever have been there, it's managed really well by Greg Skank and his crew. They have like 15 burn blocks. They burn them different times a year, different years, rotation. And it works, okay? This is the big finale. It works. The population's really booming with proper habitat management. So